August 2nd, 1985, late afternoon over North Texas. A wide-bodied jet arcs slowly west, descending through hazy summer air toward one of the busiest airports in the United States. Inside the cockpit of Delta Airlines Flight 191, 3 experienced aviators focus on the landing ahead. In the cabin, 152 passengers settle in after a long trip from Florida, eager to reach Dallas and continue on to Los Angeles. To everyone on board, the journey has been routine, just another commercial flight threading its way across the American sky. Yet beneath them, the atmosphere is beginning to change. 30 miles from Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, powerful updrafts are feeding a swelling thunderstorm. Invisible curtains of rain and wind hang from its dark core. From a distance, it looks like any other summer storm, but hidden inside is a force that, at the time, few pilots truly understood. The Microburst, a compact, ferocious downdraft capable of driving an aircraft to the ground in seconds. Flight 191 is a Lockheed L-1011. TriStar, one of the most advanced airliners of its day. Its captain, Edward Connors, is respected for calm decision-making. First Officer Rudolph Price handles the controls with steady precision. Flight engineer Nick Nassick keeps watch over the engines and systems. Together, they form a crew that embodies professionalism. They know thunderstorms can be dangerous, but experience and the technology of 1985 tells them this one is likely just a brief summer shower. On the ground, controllers in the tower keep an eye on the same cell. Lightning flickers at its base, but the runway is still open, the wind steady. Arriving jets are advised of light rain showers on final. Nothing in the official weather picture suggests a serious threat. The passengers, families, business travelers, vacationers returning home, glance through the windows at a darkening sky. Some fasten belts a little tighter as rain spatters the glass. In seat rows near the wings, a few children press their faces to the plastic panes, trying to catch sight of the airport lights beyond the clouds. No one imagines that within minutes, the aircraft will meet a wall of descending air so violent it can overpower engines and wings alike. It will become one of the most devastating wind shear accidents in aviation history, a disaster that will claim more than 100 lives, transform how pilots train for storms, and forever change how airports watch the sky. This is the story of Delta Airlines Flight 191, how an ordinary approach turned to catastrophe, how investigators uncovered the secrets of a hidden weather menace, and how the lessons carved from tragedy now safeguard every plane that dares a thunderstorm's edge. By the mid-1980s, Delta Airlines had grown from a regional crop dusting outfit into one of America's most respected carriers. Its white and red jets connected small towns and major hubs alike, and its crews were known for methodical professionalism. Among the jewels of its fleet was the Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, a wide-body aircraft designed to compete with the McDonnell Douglas DC-10 and Boeing's new generation of twin-aisle jets. The TriStar was admired for its quiet engines, roomy cabin, and cutting-edge safety features. Its autopilot and flight director systems were considered state-of-the-art. Its 3 Rolls-Royce turbofans gave it a smooth, confident climb. For Delta, the L-1011 represented reliability and prestige on medium and long-haul routes. Flight 191's machine, delivered in 1979, had flown thousands of hours without serious incident. Maintenance logs showed nothing unusual in the days leading up to August 2nd. From a technical standpoint, the airplane was ready for the job. But aviation safety is never just about hardware. The environment in which pilots operate, the invisible ocean of air above us, is just as critical. In summer, the southern plains of the United States are fertile ground for convective thunderstorms. Heated ground, moist Gulf air, and an approaching front can combine to create towering cumulonimbus clouds that shoot miles into the sky. Inside them lurk turbulence, hail, and most dangerously, powerful columns of air rushing downward. Before 1985, the full behavior of these downdrafts was not widely understood. Meteorologists had a name for severe wind changes near the surface, wind shear, but a particular subset, later defined as the microburst, was only beginning to appear in research papers. A microburst forms when heavy rain or hail drags cooler air earthward. When that air slams into the ground, it fans outward, producing a sudden shifting blast of wind. To an aircraft close to the ground, the sequence is treacherous. First a burst of headwind that lifts the nose, then an abrupt tailwind that robs the wings of lift. In the early 1980s, very few airports had dedicated wind shear detection equipment. Dallas-Fort Worth International, though one of the country's newest and most advanced airports, relied mainly on standard anemometers scattered near its runways. These could warn controllers of broad shifts in surface wind, but were blind to narrow, violent downbursts hiding between them. Onboard radar, while helpful for spotting heavy rain, showed only the location of precipitation, not the vertical movement of air. Pilots were trained to respect thunderstorms, to avoid towering cumulus if possible, and to keep a safe distance from visible lightning. Yet brief passes through the outer edges of storm cells were considered routine, even necessary, in busy terminal areas. Go-arounds and diversions cost time and fuel, and without hard evidence of danger, crews often judged a cell by eye, trusting experience more than unseen data. These were the conditions that framed Flight 191's arrival that Friday evening. An advanced but not omniscient airplane, a professional crew accustomed to summer weather, and an airport equipped with the best tools available, which by today's standards left them largely blind to the threat waiting beyond the clouds. August 2nd, 1985, 2:10 p.m. Eastern Time. Delta Airlines Flight 191 began its day under brilliant Florida sunshine. The L-1011 TriStar stood at the gate in Fort Lauderdale, gleaming white with the bold red cheat line of Delta's widget livery. Gate agents called the final boarding group as ramp crews secured baggage in the forward hold. Passengers filed aboard, business travelers with briefcases, families returning from summer holidays, couples heading west to meet friends. In the cockpit, Captain Edward Connors, First Officer Rudolph Price, and Flight Engineer Nick Nassick reviewed the flight plan. Weather along the route looked benign. Dallas reported warm skies and only isolated storms. After completing checklists, the crew pushed back from the gate and taxied to the runway. At 3:10 p.m. Eastern, the TriStar lifted gracefully from Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. The aircraft banked toward the Gulf, climbing through thin clouds. Cabin attendants began a beverage service as the jet leveled at cruise altitude, heading northwest over the Gulf of Mexico. For the next 2 hours, the flight was unremarkable. The kind of routine that defines commercial aviation at its safest. Passengers leafed through magazines or chatted quietly. Some dozed with headphones, lulled by the muted hiss of conditioned air. The crew monitored fuel burn and radioed ahead for arrival information. As Flight 191 crossed Louisiana, subtle hints of a changing atmosphere appeared on radar screens. Scattered cells dotted the display in shades of green and yellow, but nothing suggested a solid line of storms. Connors and Price agreed they might encounter a few showers approaching the Dallas-Fort Worth area, nothing more. Just after 5:30 p.m. Central Time, the aircraft contacted Fort Worth Center, beginning its descent toward the Metroplex. Controllers cleared them to 11,000 feet, and then handed them off to the DFW arrival frequency. Outside, clouds thickened into rolling gray mounds. From the flight deck, lightning flickered far to the north. The captain commented on the haze. "Looks like rain showers on the field." Inside the cabin, attendants prepared passengers for landing. Over the public address system, one crew member reminded travelers to stow trays and return seatbacks to the upright position. Many looked out at the gathering dusk, unaware of the storm's true strength. As the TriStar neared 5,000 feet, the pilots listened to the latest Automatic Terminal Information Service, ATIS, broadcast. The message reported light rain and visibility around 6 miles, with winds steady from the east, conditions still considered acceptable for landing. Approach control instructed them to expect runway 17L, a long strip running north-south on the airport's east side. Flight 191 was sequenced behind a small commuter plane and another wide-body inbound from the west. Controllers watched the flow of traffic carefully, balancing efficiency with the growing storm. From their vantage point in the tower, rain curtains obscured parts of the airfield, but no sensor showed the microburst forming silently just beyond the threshold of runway 17L. In the cockpit, the crew configured the aircraft for landing. Slats extended, flaps lowered, speed brakes armed. Engines were set for approach power. Everything about the TriStar's descent looked normal. A textbook arrival into one of America's busiest hubs. As the TriStar descended through 3,000 feet, the sky ahead turned a deep steel gray. Out beyond the right wing, sheets of rain slanted across open pasture land, veiling the far horizon. From the left, a muted orange glow of evening sun spilled beneath the storm, turning the cockpit windows into panes of liquid amber. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport lay only a few miles away, its runways stretching across the flat prairie. Controllers in the tower watched as the commuter plane ahead of Delta 191 touched down safely, tires spraying water from the damp pavement. To them, the cell approaching the field looked manageable, a late summer squall likely to pass quickly. On board, the crew exchanged observations about the weather. Captain Connors suggested holding slightly high on the glide path to remain clear of the heaviest rain. Price, flying the approach, nodded, eyes fixed on instruments. The engineer monitored engine performance, noting the power margin should the landing require a go-around. At 6:03 p.m., approach cleared Flight 191 to descend to 1,800 feet and intercept the localizer for runway 17L. The pilots armed the autopilot for the final segment, but hand flying remained an option if turbulence increased. The windshield wipers clattered intermittently against a fine spray. From the cabin, passengers could now see streaks of lightning within the storm. Some clutched armrests as the airplane jostled gently. Flight attendants walked the aisle, ensuring belts were secure before taking their own seats near the galley. The intercom chimed. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." As the L-1011 crossed the outer marker, a strong headwind suddenly pushed against its nose, giving the plane a brief surge of lift. Price compensated with a slight pitch down and trimmed for the extra speed. A voice on the radio, the captain of an aircraft just past the runway, warned of rain and gusty winds near the threshold. The report didn't sound alarming, but Connors acknowledged it with a calm, "Roger." Another mile closer, the TriStar entered a curtain of rain so dense that visibility shrank to almost nothing. Water streamed across the windscreen, blurring the landing lights ahead. Inside the storm, hidden downdrafts gathered strength. On the ground, no instrument could detect the bubble of cold air beginning its plunge. The first officer kept the descent steady, scanning airspeed and altitude. The captain coached quietly. "Looking good. Just watch your sink rate." But at 400 feet above the ground, a new force hit them, a sharp downdraft, followed almost instantly by a tailwind. The airplane's lift dropped, its nose dipped despite engine thrust. Price pushed the throttles forward to maximum, calling, "Go around!" Connors added, "Push it up, push it way up," as the ground proximity alarm sounded its urgent warning. "Sink rate, pull up!" The TriStar strained to climb, engines howling against the drag of rain-soaked air. But the Microburst's downward rush outpowered even their full thrust. In those seconds, Flight 191's fate was sealed by physics no pilot could yet fully anticipate. Outside the windshield, the runway appeared, then vanished behind driving rain as the jet sank faster than its wings could carry it. At 6:05 p.m., Delta Flight 191 was barely 400 feet above the ground, aligned with the runway lights of 17L. The TriStar's engines thundered at full power, but the aircraft continued to sink. Inside the cockpit, the three men worked as one. Connors monitoring altitude, Price gripping the yoke, Nassik scanning engine gauges and calling out speed. The Microburst struck in its full strength. A rolling mass of cold air, heavier than the summer atmosphere around it, plunged toward the surface, fanning outward as it hit the ground. To the crew, it felt as though an invisible hand had pushed the airplane down. Airspeed bled off despite the throttles being firewalled. The nose pitched up as Price tried to maintain glide slope, but the tailwind robbed the wings of lift. "Watch your sink," Connors urged, his voice clipped but steady. The ground proximity warning blared again. "Sink rate, pull up!" Price pulled back, but the vertical speed indicator showed a descent of more than 1,000 feet per minute. There was little altitude left to trade for recovery. At 200 feet, the TriStar's landing gear clipped the roof of a car traveling along Highway 114, which paralleled the airport perimeter. The driver,
A man heading home from work died instantly. A split second later, the left engine struck a light pole, shearing it off in a shower of sparks. The jet's nose pitched up slightly as Price fought to regain control, but the downburst pressed relentlessly. Seconds later, the aircraft's left wing struck a pair of large water tanks just short of the runway threshold. Fuel tanks ruptured, and a fireball erupted as the L-1011 cartwheeled across the field. Inside the cabin, passengers felt a violent lurch followed by a deafening roar. Overhead bins burst open, luggage and debris cascaded through the aisle. Seats tore loose from their rails. A flash of flame swept momentarily through the
fuselage as the aircraft broke apart. Rescue workers stationed near the runway saw a plume of black smoke rising against the storm-dark sky. They sped toward the crash site in foam trucks and ambulances, bouncing over soggy grass. As they arrived, flames engulfed much of the wreckage, but sections of fuselage lay relatively intact. Survivors were already scrambling free or being pulled from twisted metal by first responders and passengers who had escaped injury. The impact and fire claimed the lives of 137 people, including the motorist on the highway, most of the passengers, and all but one of the crew. Miraculously, 28 individuals survived, some with serious injuries, others astonishingly unhurt. Their accounts would later provide vivid testimony of those final chaotic seconds, a blinding flash, a tearing sound like thunder, and then darkness. Within minutes, Dallas-Fort Worth activated its full-scale emergency plan. Hospitals across the Metroplex prepared to receive victims. Firefighters battled blazes fed by jet fuel as paramedics triaged the injured on rain-soaked grass. The storm cell moved on almost as quickly as it had formed, leaving an eerie calm over the field. Against a backdrop of fading rain and acrid smoke, rescuers worked frantically, driven by the hope of finding more survivors among the wreckage of Flight 191. In the first moments after the crash, silence gave way to a chaotic mix of sirens, shouts, and the hiss of rain striking burning metal. The microburst had passed, leaving a still, heavy air over the field. A column of black smoke rose above the wreckage, visible for miles across the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Airport fire crews, already stationed near the approach end of runway 17L, were on scene within a minute. Their engines splashed through standing water, skidding to a halt beside twisted fragments of fuselage. Foam cannons unleashed white torrents onto the flames, licking at ruptured fuel tanks. Rescuers in protective gear picked their way through smoldering debris, calling out to anyone who might still be alive. Miraculously, there were survivors. In a torn section of the forward cabin, a flight attendant, dazed but conscious, crawled toward daylight through a jagged opening. Nearby, two passengers helped each other down from an overturned row of seats. Others staggered across wet grass, some barefoot, some burned, clutching arms or legs. Their faces bore the stunned expression of people pulled suddenly from ordinary life into disaster. Firefighters focused first on areas not yet engulfed in flames. They cut through aluminum panels with hydraulic tools, widening gaps for escape. A few rescuers climbed atop wreckage to hoist out passengers, lowering them carefully to waiting medics. Rain helped suppress smaller fires, but smoke from burning upholstery and jet fuel made breathing difficult. Paramedics set up triage under the shelter of rescue vehicles. Survivors were tagged according to urgency: red for critical injuries, yellow for moderate, green for minor. Ambulances shuttled back and forth along muddy service roads, ferrying victims to hospitals in Grapevine, Irving, and Dallas. Among those pulled alive from the wreckage was a young boy traveling alone. His clothes soaked but otherwise unharmed. A firefighter wrapped him in a blanket and stayed at his side until he could be reunited with relatives. Another survivor, a businessman seated near the rear of the cabin, later recalled how the fuselage split open beside him, creating an escape route just as flames erupted forward of his row. Not everyone could be saved. Many passengers in the central section of the aircraft perished on impact or were trapped by fire before rescuers could reach them. Crews worked against time, cutting through collapsed ceiling panels, moving seats, and braving heat to search every pocket of the wreckage. Their efforts continued well after sunset, illuminated by portable floodlights and the flashing beacons of emergency vehicles. As darkness settled, the scale of the tragedy became clear. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board began arriving,
coordinating with local authorities to secure the scene once fire hazards were under control. For those who had survived, shock mingled with grief as they watched the rescue continue around them. A grim tableau of metal, rain, and determination. By night's end, 28 souls had been pulled from the crash site alive. Some would face long recoveries. Others, like the boy and a handful of passengers in the aft cabin, would walk away with only cuts and bruises. Their stories, of sudden impact, of crawling through fire and rain toward rescuers, would later help investigators and safety experts understand what had happened inside Flight 191 during those final desperate seconds.
By the morning after the accident, a team from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, had arrived in Dallas. Their first priority was to secure the crash site, a broad swath of grass and mud strewn with scorched metal and luggage. Firefighters and airport staff helped cordon off debris fields so that investigators could begin their painstaking work. The team's goals were clear: determine why a well-maintained wide-body jet, flown by experienced pilots, had fallen out of the sky in the final moments of an otherwise routine flight, and learn how to prevent such tragedies in the future. Investigators photographed the wreckage from every angle, then mapped the distribution of fragments. The pattern told a story. The TriStar had first struck a car and a light pole on Highway 114, then smashed into a water tank before cartwheeling across open ground. Pieces of wing and fuselage radiated from a central scar in the earth. Fire damage was most severe near the left wing, where fuel tanks had ruptured. Inside a temporary lab, specialists examined the aircraft's digital flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, CVR, two sturdy black boxes designed to survive catastrophic impacts. The CVR, recovered from the rear fuselage, was scorched but intact. Once cleaned and opened, it yielded a 30-minute audio record of the crew's final conversations. The tape revealed a cockpit that was professional, calm, and alert. Connors and Price discussed routine tasks: altitudes, headings, landing clearance. As they neared the outer marker, they remarked on lightning ahead and light turbulence. Price's voice remained steady as he reported descent checks complete. Then came a change in tone, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The CVR captured Connors noting rain ahead, followed by the sound of windshield wipers and increasing background noise from rushing air seconds later. Price called out a gain in airspeed, a headwind, the first sign of entering a microburst. Moments later, his voice tightened as airspeed fell and a warning chime sounded. "Go around," Price exclaimed as the descent rate spiked. Connors responded quickly, "Push it up." The engineer confirmed engines at maximum thrust. The recording ended with a series of clipped instructions, the synthetic voice of the ground proximity warning, and, just before impact, an abrupt silence. Weather specialists on the NTSB team turned to radar data and eyewitness accounts. They learned that a compact but violent downburst had formed inside the storm cell just north of the runway threshold. Its core of dense, rain-cooled air had raced downward then outward, creating a sudden shift from headwind to tailwind along the approach path. The microburst's strength exceeded 70 knots, far beyond what the L-1011 could counter so close to the ground. The final report would cite the probable cause as the aircraft's encounter with a microburst-induced wind shear during final approach. Contributing factors included limited real-time weather detection and the absence of specific pilot training for microburst recovery. While technical findings were sobering, they also pointed toward solutions. New weather radar techniques, ground-based detection systems, and refined training could give future pilots the warning and skills that Flight 191's crew had lacked. The NTSB's recommendations would soon shape the next era of storm awareness in aviation. The disaster of Delta Flight 191 did more than leave scars on a field near Dallas-Fort Worth. It forced an entire industry to confront a deadly gap in its understanding of storms and to develop tools that could prevent future tragedies. Even as investigators pieced together the sequence of events, meteorologists and engineers examined how weather systems like the one over North Texas could be tracked in real time. At the time of the crash, few airports possessed equipment capable of detecting the narrow, fast-moving microbursts that had doomed the TriStar. Most relied on conventional wind sensors scattered along runways, adequate for steady breezes, but blind to compact downbursts hidden between them. In the months that followed,
The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, accelerated plans to install low-level wind shear alert systems, LLWAS, at major airports. These networks of sensors created a ring of observation points, feeding controllers with warnings when sudden shifts in surface wind suggested dangerous shear nearby. At the same time, research with Doppler radar, then a relatively new technology, showed that its ability to detect velocity changes inside precipitation could be harnessed to spot microbursts before an aircraft entered them. Within a decade, Doppler-based terminal weather radar became standard across the United States. Training, too, changed profoundly. Before 191, most flight crews learned about wind shear only in broad terms. Afterward, airlines introduced simulator scenarios replicating microburst encounters, giving pilots hands-on practice in recognizing the signs and executing escape maneuvers, maximum thrust, minimal configuration changes, and a steady pitch to trade speed for climb until clear of danger. Today, wind shear escape guidance is embedded in airline manuals and checklists worldwide. The crash also spurred refinements in cockpit.
At Weather Radar, designers improved resolution and added predictive wind shear alerts. Modern systems can now sense energy shifts ahead of the aircraft and issue an oral warning, wind shear ahead, allowing a crew to abort an approach before entering harm's way. Beyond hardware and training, Flight 191 reshaped the culture around thunderstorms. Controllers, dispatchers, and pilots began to take even small convective cells seriously, giving wider berth to any storm on short final. The accident also encouraged better cooperation between meteorologists and operations personnel, ensuring that a rapidly developing squall would trigger timely advisories rather than rely on pilots' visual judgment alone. For the families of those lost, reforms were small comfort, but they were proof that lives had not been sacrificed in vain. Memorial services held near the crash site honored both victims and survivors. At Delta, the event prompted introspection and renewed commitment to safety. In classrooms, training centers, and control towers, the memory of Flight 191 became a case study that reminded professionals how unforgiving nature can be and how vigilance saves lives. Today, decades after that stormy evening, thousands of flights land safely each day through rain showers and gusty crosswinds. Few passengers think about the invisible science protecting them. Rings of sensors around runways, radar pulses mapping every squall, and pilots ready to act the instant a warning sounds. These quiet guardians trace their lineage to lessons carved from tragedy on August 2nd, 1985.
As daylight returned over North Texas the morning after the crash, mist hung low above a scorched and rain-soaked field. Twisted metal lay silent, guarded by investigators and rescue crews who had labored through the night. The sudden violence of the evening before seemed almost impossible to reconcile with the quiet that followed. For many, the story of Delta Flight 191 ends at that lonely patch of earth. Yet its meaning extends far beyond the perimeter fence. It is a reminder that every flight, no matter how routine, is a collaboration between people, machines, and an atmosphere that can change without warning. The crew who fought to save their aircraft, the rescuers who charged through smoke and rain, the families who waited for news, all became part of a chain of courage and loss that reshaped aviation. Out of the tragedy came hard-won progress. Doppler radar now scans airport approaches, wind shear alert systems stand watch at runway ends, and pilots worldwide are trained to recognize and escape microbursts. Countless landings made safely in stormy weather bear the imprint of lessons written in the summer of 1985. For the survivors, memories remain vivid. The moment of impact, the sudden silence after the roar, the hands that pulled them to safety. For investigators and safety engineers, Flight 191 became a case study that continues to guide new generations. And for those who lost loved ones, memorials carved in stone and cared for by strangers ensure the names endure. Air travel today is one of the safest forms of transportation ever created. That safety rests on a foundation built from experience, including moments of heartbreak that demanded change. When travelers descend through rain toward glowing runway lights, they rarely know the stories that guard their path. Yet among them is the story of a tri-star, a storm, and a lesson that continues to save lives.
So on every flight, there is a quiet trust between passengers and the people who keep them safe. The pilots at the controls, the engineers who design equipment, the meteorologists watching distant clouds, and the controllers guiding aircraft through unseen currents of wind. That trust is renewed each time a landing gear touches down smoothly on wet pavement, proof that vigilance and learning never stop. Delta Flight 191 reminds us that progress often rises from tragedy, that from loss we gain knowledge, and from knowledge protection for those who follow. It stands as a solemn chapter in aviation history, and as a testament to the resilience of all who work to make the skies safe.